A ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding despite a shaky start, with both sides claiming to have won the war. In a televised address on Tuesday evening, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared a historic victory in the conflict, saying Israeli and U.S. strikes had removed the threat of Iran's nuclear and missile programs. Earlier, Donald Trump accused both Israel and Iran of violating Tuesday morning's truce. He then berated the two nations in front of the cameras in Washington.
I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the f they're doing.
Trump's comments and the ceasefire follow 12 days of air and missile strikes between the longtime enemies. Iran and Israel confirmed the truce shortly after both sides fired a barrage of missiles at each other. Iran now says it's ready to negotiate and will not violate the ceasefire unless Israel does.
For several people who lived in this building in southern Israel, the ceasefire came too late. Israel said Tehran fired off waves of missiles towards the city of Beersheba in the hours before the agreement came into effect, and that they targeted civilians.
It's gotten to the point where it's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. We've gone from scene to scene and seen that it's constantly been residential buildings, hospitals, places where civilians go around.
Israel, too, launched a blitz of airstrikes before announcing it would comply with the truce, targeting what it said were missile launchers and other sites across Iran before dawn. As emergency workers responded to overnight attacks on Tehran, reports also came in that at least 9 people had been killed in strikes on residential buildings in the northern province of Gilan, and that Israel had targeted and killed another prominent nuclear scientist. US President Donald Trump had announced the truce on Monday evening, urging the two sides to respect the agreement. Iranian state TV quoted the foreign minister as saying there was no deal on any ceasefire, but that if Israel stopped what it called its illegal aggression on the Iranian people, then it would, quote, not continue its response. Just hours earlier, Tehran retaliated by launching a missile attack on an American military base in Qatar. It had given advance warning, but it still fired up supporters at home. Trump described Tehran's response as weak, and analysts also said they believe it had been intentionally limited in scope to avoid casualties, especially American ones, and a possible escalation of the conflict. On the streets of Tehran on Tuesday morning, tensions remained. Some expressed cautious optimism, but said they wished a truce had been agreed earlier.
I haven't slept properly for 12 nights, and today, after 12 days, I finally came outside, heard about the ceasefire and decided to go for a walk. And if there's peace, why would I be against it?
In Israel, too, the situation remains charged, with foreign nationals using the window to flee, and both sides already being accused of violating the deal just hours after it was supposed to take hold.
William Wechsler is Senior Director of the Rafik Hariri Center and Middle East Programs at the Atlantic Council in Washington. He joins us for more. William, welcome. Israel's Prime Minister and the Iranian President have both claimed victory in this war. Is that at least a good sign that this ceasefire might actually hold?
It's the kind of narratives that both sides are going to have to say to their domestic constituencies. But make no mistake, on October 6, 2023, Iran was in a vastly better strategic position than it is today. There is no question which nation has been able to protect their interests and which nation has not. But right now, it looks like the ceasefire is holding.
At the same time, we're seeing reports that an early U.S. intelligence assessment says Iran's nuclear program might have only been set back by a matter of months from these strikes, although we should note the White House disputes that. What would that mean if true?
Well, that would mean that what we all suspected and what all of the military plans had shown for many years was an attack against the Iranian nuclear program would not be a single attack like what happened in Iraq and what happened in Syria some decades ago, but would have to be a prolonged campaign. We haven't seen that prolonged campaign. And presumably, the reason why we have a ceasefire today is because Iran is willing to go to the negotiating table in a way that it wasn't previously in order to prevent that long-term campaign.
Is Iran then in a better position for negotiating if it's essentially escaped these strikes destroying its centrifuges, if this intelligence report is correct, and with the U.S. not wanting to really commit to anything more than these bombardments?
It definitely is. And, these next negotiations, assuming that they begin, are going to end in only one of three ways. They're going to end if Iran blinks, if Trump blinks, or if there's no resolution. Iran blinking means that they sign on the dotted line and give up their right to enrich uranium to themselves domestically. That there's nothing that could be better for the Middle East overall security than for that capacity. Trump blinking means something less than that. And if there's no resolution, that means that the war will go on eventually.
Do you believe that it's realistic that a regime that has lost so much of its power over the past 2 years, as you noted, would also give up its nuclear enrichment? Isn't that a core function or a core selling point domestically for this regime?
There's no question that it is, and it's no question that it would be to drink the poison chalice the way that the Supreme Leader's predecessor did when he finally agreed to peace with Iraq to end the Iraq-Iran war. But Iran is not in a position to negotiate very strongly. They're going to have to make some very, very difficult decisions about where their red lines are going to be. It is not the same place that it was a month ago. It's not the place that it was 6 months ago or even a year ago. If I was an advisor to the Supreme Leader, I would be asking what is the most likely scenario for the regime to retain its hold on the Iranian people. That most likely scenario is for them to focus only domestically and to eliminate the potential for a continuing war. In order to do that, I think they're going to have to get rid of the right to enrichment. That is, unless Trump blinks in the negotiation and allows them to leave the negotiating table with something far less than that, something that advantages them far more. That would not be what Israel wants, but that will be what Iran wants.
All right, that's William Wechsler from the Atlantic Council in Washington. William, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Israel says it has achieved the strategic goals it intended when it launched its surprise attack on Iran. Here's Israeli President Isaac Herzog speaking at the site of an Iranian missile strike on an apartment block, which killed 4 residents and wounded 22 others.
And what we have done successfully in this operation is to remove the Iranian nuclear threat looming above Israel, the region, and the free world. In this respect, I commend the Israeli leadership, Prime Minister Netanyahu, the cabinet, and of course the Israeli military. I commend and thank wholeheartedly President Donald Trump and of course the US Air Force. And I commend all those who have been involved in this operation, meaning an operation that clearly has a direct impact on the well-being and safety of the world, the region, and the state of Israel.
And we can welcome Bradley Bowman with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies for some insights here. So this sounds like Herzog saying mission accomplished. Do you think that we have now seen the end of Israeli strikes on Iran?
Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I think a mission accomplished depends on how you define the mission. If the mission was to seriously or severely degrade Iran's nuclear program, I would say mission accomplished. If the mission was to completely destroy it, I would say it was not accomplished. At a minimum, I would say the program has been set back by many months, depending how you define the program. But today we have a regime in Iran that understands that the Israeli Air Force can strike anywhere at will in Iran, and they can not do anything about it, and the United States can do the same. And so I think that helps explain their relatively tepid response in launching those 14 ballistic missiles at the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East.
Yeah, so if the nuclear program has been set back by a minimum of just many months, as you say, do you think that Netanyahu got what he wanted out of Trump here? And at what cost, given, you know, the ire we've seen over Israel having broken the agreement that Trump's brokered, as he said?
Yeah, I wouldn't really say it that way. I challenge respectfully the premise a little bit here. You know, you had Israel doing what I would advise, and that is making max use of the available time before the midnight deadline. And then you had Iran to launch ballistic missiles and push back and forth, and evidently a subsequent call with the prime minister. And it's holding for now. But, you know, not all ceasefires are good, and some are bad. And how does one judge the quality of a ceasefire? Well, I would say you judge it based on whether it addresses the main sources of the conflict. And from my perspective, from Israel's perspective, from the perspective of American national security interests, I would say the main sources of conflict here are a regime in Iran that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel and has been since 1979, that has the largest ballistic missile program in the Middle East, habitually supports terrorism, and has been inching toward a nuclear weapons program. So, you know, it doesn't take a lot of empathy to say if you're Israeli and you got a nation state dedicated to your destruction moving toward a nuclear weapons capability, that's a problem. So if you accept what I'm saying about the source of conflict, those four sources, only one of those four has been partially addressed. The three remain unaddressed. So that means now that the shooting has stopped, what is Iran doing? They're busy trying to rebuild their air missile defense system. They're rebuilding their ballistic missile program. And there's all kinds of activities at other sites other than Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, including at Pickaxe Mountain, where they may be undertaking activities. And we don't know because the IAEA inspectors are not there. So a lot of concerns, I would say.
Well, given those capabilities, do you think the potential strategic gain of the U.S. joining in Israeli strikes was worth the risk, even if Iran's response was relatively limited and muted this time around?
Well, you know, if this is where it stops, and that's a big if, I would say yes. I would say you've had presidents of both parties saying for years that the United States cannot permit Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. Yet you did not have any presidents willing to back up those words with kinetic action, and Donald Trump did. And we did at Fordo, for example, with the massive ordnance penetrator, something that Israel could not do. I hope it was completely destroyed. It was at least seriously degraded. And that is good news for the United States. That's good news for the Middle East. And that's good news for anyone in the world who doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And I'd say that should be pretty much everyone other than the regime in Iran.
Now, it's interesting. We've also had Trump. Well, it looks like Trump is now going to be lifting sanctions on China buying Iranian oil. I just want to get your view here. Do you think that's a good idea?
No, that's a big mistake. That's a huge mistake, because what does Iran use that money for when it sells oil to China? Well, it uses it to oppress the Iranian people, to support terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, to build its ballistic missile program, and to attack its Arab neighbors, to attack the U.S. military like it just did in the last day or two. By the way, that attack on El Udeid would have killed hundreds of Americans if it were not for air defenses, and to attack Israel. So that's a very bad idea. You should not lift sanctions on Iran. We should enforce the ones already on the books and impose more to deprive the regime of the funding that they have used since 1979 to support terrorism and try to attack the world's only majority Jewish state.
Yeah. Now, so as the ceasefire for now seems to be holding, I'm wondering whether you think this could lead toward any kind of meaningful diplomacy that could reduce the risk of further conflagrations in the region.
You know, I serve in the U.S. Army, and those who serve in the military are consistently the last that want to see conflict. I hope that we could get a diplomatic solution, but a diplomatic solution would be an end to Iran's nuclear weapons program, including no enrichment and addressing their strategic ballistic missile arsenal. But I see no scenario where this regime is going to agree to that. And I also see years and years of experience where the Iranian regime has used negotiations cynically to create a patient pathway to a nuclear weapons capability. So maybe what's just happened to them and their extreme vulnerability is going to make them see things in a new light. They'll recognize Israel's right to exist and stop supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and stop their nuclear weapons program. But I'm not holding my breath. And so I think that's why the United States, along with our NATO allies and others, should be doing a max support campaign for the Iranian people so that they can finally have a government that is interested in their welfare rather than being the primary exporter of terrorism.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on DW to share your insights. It's been a pleasure speaking with Bradley Bowman from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you. You bet.